Hello, good afternoon. I'm assuming that you can hear me well. My name is Leszek Tasiemski. I'm Vice President of R&D of Business Solutions at F-Secure, and I'm delighted to be here. My plan is to spend the next 45 minutes or so and try to tell a bit about the trends and how those trends are often surprising even big companies. And because the name of the conference is Positive Technologies, I'm just hoping that I will not scare you too much. Let's start. I want to start with this quote from Mike Tyson. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. Why I think this quote is relevant and why it applies to cybersecurity. As we all know, and I will show you in a second on concrete examples, internet is full of threats. Like literally, whenever you open anything with public IP address to the network, within minutes you will start getting some kind of attack noise, so we call it. It's like literally thousands every day, and it doesn't even trigger incidents anymore. But what we often forget to realize is that those very serious breaches that put even big and mature companies on their knees are relatively rare. And those are the attacks that I wanted to maybe focus a little bit more on today, because for those attacks, very few organizations are actually prepared. And I mean situations when we have full-on crisis. But let's get to that in a moment. So we have end of 2020. So how does the typical landscape look like? What we are actually, what the history is, what we used to think about the security and the model of protection is this castle model, where we have like well-guarded and well-isolated company network with firewalls, VPNs, and we could easily tell what is inside and what is outside. This is not a valid thinking anymore. The current infrastructure is more like an airport. So people come and go, data comes and goes. There's plenty of interactions with different parties, different clouds, and it's just increasingly more difficult. So how it looks like nowadays in a typical organization that we are interfacing as F-Secure, but also we are one of those organizations, is that we have some collaboration clouds. So it can be anything from Google, Microsoft Office 365, or several others. Less and less companies are still hosting their own email servers or their own file sharing servers or chat systems. It's all in the cloud. Similarly with ERP clouds or ERP systems, those are also more and more outsourced to external parties. And then we have production clouds, like with the massive Amazon's AWS, Microsoft Azure, Alibaba Cloud, and several others. We also push our production systems outside of our own premises and our own data centers. And those three combined of this multi-cloud environment, what it means for the protection is that on the one hand, it's good because those companies usually they know very well what they are doing, so they know how to keep our assets safe. But then when the tricky part is the integration point. So this is where we can fail. We can fail at proper integration, properly securing the integration, and we can also fail in configuration of those services. What is also new this year is massive work from home movement. So we all moved home. I'm also now speaking from my own apartment, which means that now what used to be considered as like secure office environment, where you could be like reasonably certain that nobody is listening to the discussions, that the network is somewhat controlled by the IT, all of this is gone right now. Of course, we still have VPNs, and I'm currently on a VPN, but I have my home network with plenty of smart devices connected to it. And those are the devices that our IT is not controlling. And this is also those are the devices that the IT in your organizations are not controlling. So if you have any like smart speakers if you have smart TVs or even smart vacuum cleaners that are just riding along in your flat, or just listening in, you need to consider also those elements as part of security ecosystem of the company. And this is completely outside of the control of the IT systems. Then we'll also have social media, which, of course, social media, so your company's Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter account, those are not directly linked to your internal systems, or maybe they're linked just one way, but they are really golden when it comes to information scouting, reconnaissance, and phishing the employees, because we are very generously sharing information about ourselves, our position, the structure of the company, especially on LinkedIn, which means that it's very easy for an attacker, malicious actor, to actually impersonate somebody and look legit when contacting you, increasing the chances of success. I will have some examples later on. And then we have increasing adaptation of machine learning techniques. Some like to call it AI, which also brings some problems and consideration from security point of view. And IoT, as I already mentioned, we are literally surrounded by devices with some operating system and IP address, even though it's in the form and shape of a light bulb. It is still a valid operating system with a network connection. F-Secure is operating a network of public honeypots. So we like to see and observe the trends that our honeypots are seeing. So basically, honeypots, for those of you who might not be familiar with the concept, those are the operating systems with public IP addresses that simply look vulnerable. They look like an easy target. So from interesting things on our honeypots, we are tracking what kind of malware is being dropped on the honeypots. As you can see, there's plenty of Trojans also for Windows platform, even though the honeypots are pretending Linux boxes. But also you see Bitcoin mining malware. You see lots of generic droppers and generic malware. So this is all the noise. Of course, we also intercept the commands that are entered into our telnet or SSH systems on the honeypots. And as you can see here, this is just a sample from the last week. We have lots of bots attacking our telnet and trying to abuse or use BusyBox to execute different operations. And for those of you who don't know what BusyBox is, it's actually a combination of different tools from the Unix, Linux ecosystem, just in case those tools are not available on the host that we have just attacked. So it's kind of like Swiss Army knife of a hacker on just hacked system. Of course, we are also intercepting the passwords. And what is not surprising is that we see the passwords like password, like ABC123, all those kind of typical and popular ones. But what really attracts our attention are those not typical ones, which I try to highlight with the red color here. Those are not like easily guessable passwords. So quite often it means that those are the passwords that are actually leaked from somewhere. And sometimes those passwords are actually factory backdoors to some network devices. And then quite often we see a couple of months or years later that actually those pop up as the actual vulnerabilities and factory backdoors to the devices. Now, about the malware distribution methods and the trends in that, what we can see is that it's merely 5% is the old kind of software crack. So you can imagine you are downloading some illegal copy of some software, and then the malware is somehow embedded into that. This is a small fraction, and it's actually dropping. It dropped year over year 5 percentage points. Then we have exploit kits and drive-by download. So this is what happens if you happen to be on a malicious website. So without any intervention from your side, a vulnerability in your browser, for example, or in your PDF reader allows the malware to actually download, execute some malware. So it's 9%, not much, and it's also dropping. Then we have 35% of manually installed or second stage payload malware distribution. And this is interesting because especially the second stage payload, what it means in practice is that you actually have some other malware that is operating on your machine. And then that malware is downloading another malware that is usually more specialized in some functionality. And then functionality might be spreading spam, it might be encrypting your data, or it might be stealing your information. So we can also observe that the malware is becoming more and more modular and specialized kind of for the task that is about to be taken by the attacker. And that is rising by 11 percentage points year over year. And then the whole rest, so 51% of all the distribution methods that we see is over email. And this has raised year over year 8 percentage points. And now, how does it look when we relate that to COVID? What you can see on this chart is the relative trend of COVID-related email spam or email attacks over time, and you can see it correlates perfectly well with the peak of infections we had in Europe around April, and then it was relatively calming down over the summer, and now it's going up again because the infections are also up again, and the topic is more like easy to push to the receivers. And when we look at the email threats, what kind of malware we actually see in those malicious emails, you can see that Lockybot is the leader with actually gain almost 7% year over year. Lockybot is an info stealer. So, for example, it can steal your Bitcoin wallet or a cryptocurrency wallet. It can steal your passwords. Emotet, on the other hand, it's interesting piece of malware that primary function of it is to do some kind of reconnaissance and then download the secondary malware, which is more suited for a concrete job, like in the case of our research, encrypting your data and demanding ransom. Then we have Pharmogramkos and Ave Maria. All of those are either info stealers or just Trojan horses that allow remote access for the attacker. Now, what's interesting, this is how such an email looks in reality, and what you can see if you look closer. Both of those emails have attachments, and one of them is both of them are compressed archives. One is GZ, and the other is ACE. Those are kind of lesser known compression methods, but they are fully supported by very common tools like 7-zip to extract on the machine. But because those compression methods are obscure, the attacker is far less likely to be caught at the gateway, because not many gateway products actually extract anything else than plain zip attachments. So that's another kind of trick that the attackers are doing in order to increase chances of success. Now, when we look at the phishing, we see that the phishing is actually omnipotent everywhere. All the sectors, financial, email providers, social networking, all kinds of cloud services. So your AWS or Google Cloud or Azure is also a target. E-commerce, online services, and telecoms. Pretty much anything that can be phished is going to be phished sooner or later. And you can also see the trend that we see about the phishing. Now you can see a spike of email providers. If we take that out, you can see that it's actually, the trend is growing everywhere, regardless of the sector. And now let's look at the brand. So who is being phished the most? When it comes to the financial sector, Chase and Bank of America are the leaders. Then we have Halifax, Bancolombia, etc. So all the bigger banks are being actively phished. Same with email providers. You can see that Outlook is being absolute leader in anti-targeting. Similar situation with social networking, Facebook, of course, leads, and then WhatsApp and Instagram, actually both also owned by Facebook, are basically accountable for like easily 80% of all the social networking phishing. And then, of course, it's followed by LinkedIn. When it comes about the online cloud collaboration platforms, Office 365 is leading the pack. Now, some concrete examples of LinkedIn phishing. And some interesting things here is that actually this example, it happened for you. So those are real phishing messages from LinkedIn. Quite often and usually those phishing attempts, they pretend to be headhunters and recruiters. But what you can see here, I try to hide as much as possible, not to make it impossible to identify the person, but what you can still see is that the person actually looks pretty legit. So there's over 500 connections. And also the profile, when I browse through the profile is absolutely complete and legit, and it looks like absolutely legitimate recruitment offer. Though, if you clicked on that link, what actually happened, it took you to something that pretended to be Microsoft 365 login screen. So that was actually a phishing attempt to get your Office 365 credentials. And now there's question of machine learning and AI in all this. This is quite an old example. It's from 2016, but I still wanted to bring it here because it shows perfectly well how the quality of machine learning is just a function of the quality of data that is used to train it. So this is the Microsoft's AI chatbot that was trained on the actual Twitter feed or Twitter content in order to be able to interact with people. So what you can see within 24 hours, the Thai bot actually went from being super nice and super polite to people to basically full-on Nazi, just basing on its learning on the Twitter feed. Now, why is it relevant everywhere else? Here we have like classical example of maybe not targeted, but still so the chatbot was fed with information that made it react in a certain way. Now, if you take that example and that logic to other applications, like, for example, calculating your insurance risk, or trading on a stock exchange, or even some medical applications, we can use, and the attackers can use similar mechanism to actually manipulate the learning engine, and by tweaking the input that becomes the training material, they can actually make it either blind or biased in one way or another. And there is plenty of science on that topic. Already 8 years ago, there was a hacker tutorial that teaches how to bypass fraud detection in banking and e-commerce and also e-gaming. So as some of you might know, the online casinos are excellent places, or this used to be excellent places for money laundering. And then being able to bypass the machine learning that was set up to catch all the unusual behavior was worth a lot of money. Unfortunately, we also see that there is a potential of attacking the machine learning models in medical applications, which is worrying. What is a good thing in all the AI and machine learning kind of attack scene is that so far most of the actual attack examples were mostly academic work or in a way a joke. So it was relatively harmless. But also, this is because the adaptation of machine learning in the actual business critical operations is still pretty marginal. Where we see AI thriving so far is all the recommendation engines, is the chatbots. So while attacks on those systems might be pretty embarrassing, they are as easy to spot, but also the damage is relatively low. But application of machine learning in the actual critical business processes in banking or insurance or medical applications, it's coming, and then it's going to be really risky. Now about actual attacks. So what I discussed so far was all the kind of typical internet noise, but when we see like the actual bigger scale attack, what actually happens? So what you can see on the slide is the actual extraction of our actual incident response requests from the actual customers. Some of them are censored for obvious reasons. We of course cannot reveal the identity of the customer, but as you can see, sometimes it's pretty dramatic. So you can see that there is a full compromise of customer network. There is a ransom request about attacker having access to some server source code. Again, ransomware attack, and the company needs some on-site support. Some compromised Windows 10 environment, some call forging and threatening of the leadership team. What we can see quite often is that there is blackmailing of the leadership teams. And the obvious case of blackmailing is that when the attacker can actually prove that they have stolen the data or some intellectual property, or if it's simply they have encrypted the whole database and they don't have to prove anything. It's visible with plain eye that is being encrypted. But sometimes we also see that the attacker is actually threatening the leadership team about allegedly stealing information or allegedly knowing about critical vulnerability. So the threat is that, okay, I know how to leak your data, I know how to bypass security in your systems, and if you don't pay me X amount of money or Bitcoin in that case, I will just leak your data or I'll exploit your systems. And those are really dramatic decisions because the leadership team has no way of knowing if that person is just trying to play them, or do they actually have what it takes to materialize the threat. So those situations are quite often pretty dramatic. Now some actual example, as you can see, that happened very recently. It's from the 26th of September. Our team analyzing, like we have a team in Poznań who is analyzing 24/7 events at the customer and the detection security detections. They found something suspicious. So as you can see, the comment on the just below the red rectangle on the slide, there is nc-e bin bash, and then there is some domain name and the port. What it actually is, for those of you not familiar with Netcat, is actually a reverse shell. So it means that the server, in that case, is actually calling home. So it is creating a connection outbound to the port 4444. And on the other end, there is a receiver that actually awaits that connection. And when that connection is established, basically the attacker has a full access to the shell of that compromised system. So we found that out. We informed the customer pretty much 45 minutes later that the situation has happened. 15 minutes later, the customer actually confirmed that yes, this is the case. They provided some, they conducted some internal investigation, and like 15 minutes later, they did shut down the system. What actually caused that issue was that the Jira server was unpatched. So there is a well-known vulnerability registered under CVE from last year, 2019, 11,581, and that was simply exploited by the attacker. What that vulnerability did, that was a critical vulnerability that allowed remote code execution on the machine. So by just having any kind of access to that Jira instance, you could execute a command on the machine, on the local server, which allowed the attacker to actually open that reverse shell to let him conduct further actions and expand laterally, make lateral inside the company. So as you can see, this example that we have investigated as F-Secure, and it doesn't take much to have a server in the organization that somebody forgot to patch on time, and it got exploited. Now with LinkedIn, continuing on the LinkedIn example, we also analyzed the Lazarus Group campaign targeting the cryptocurrency vertical. And if you didn't hear yet, Lazarus Group is actually associated with the North Korean government. So that's apparently how they make money. And Lazarus Group is actively targeting on LinkedIn with phishing. Again, it's recruitment kind of phishing messaging, people from the cryptocurrency industry with some job offers. And then if they open the documents, you can see the screenshots on the right on the slide. They look pretty legitimate. So there is some concrete information, even some pretty attractive salary information, and even some risk assessment checklist. So it actually looks like something that is legit. It's not just random text, and it's in proper English. But actually, when you open those documents, what you will see that apparently this document is protected by GDPR, and to open the data and to open the document, you have to enable the content. And of course, the content is the macro, and the macro is malicious. So what happens when you open that? It actually executes some operating system commands that load the second stage of payload and infects your machine with malware. Another example that I wanted to share with you is Emotet. Emotet is a malware that can be used to install and to operate other malware. But how it works in practice is that the attackers, the operators, then they infect as many machines as possible. And what happens next? With such a created network of infected machines, those are actively traded on the underground markets for other cyber criminals to actually execute concrete actions. And those concrete actions might be stealing information, it might be encrypting the data, it might be also further spreading, for example, spam or phishing messages. And we can see that the spread of Emotet is really active and on the rise. And the malware itself is pretty old. So it started in 2014. So it's pretty old malware, but it keeps being developed. And it started as a banking Trojan and evolved a lot since then. Now, what is the mechanism of the attack? Is that quite usually you are getting phished or you are getting spammed by some email or some other in some other form you get delivered a link. Then you open a malicious document which either explores some vulnerabilities in your web browser, or it might be a macro, or pretty much whatever is available to the attacker. The malware will use some of the methods to get in. The Emotet gets installed. And what it does, it actually performs recon, and then it installs a trickbot, which is another malware that actually performs two actions. One action is the recon in stealing the information, so it can get information about the system, also to see if it's worthy enough to install ransomware on that, or what to do with that system. And also it has ability to spread laterally over the network. So the tricky part about the trickbot is that if you clean up one system, but without isolating or taking the whole network down, it will immediately get reinfected. So in order to clean this up properly, you need to take all the network down, clean the machine one by one, and only then bring the network back, because otherwise it will just keep spreading over and over again. And so it's quite nasty and expensive to remove. And then the malicious operators, what they can actually do, they can decide how to proceed with the infected system. So whether it makes sense to monetize this infection through encrypting your data and demanding ransom, or whether it's better to steal some information. So both Emotet and Tripod can provide them with the information of actually what they've been infecting, and if it's like important target enough. What often happens in case of Emotet is that actually Ryuk ransomware is being installed, and Ryuk ransomware is pretty effective. So that's the one that actually generated estimated 61 million USD of revenue only last year. So this is effective, and it's often generating revenue for the attackers groups. And as you can see, it actually gets to the media a lot. Now, what happens if we see the leakages? Previously, the attackers could only rely on payment the ransom because of the data loss, and in the effect, some companies simply decided to just well, okay, we lost some data, we just build something from whatever kind of or whatever old backups we have, and then we go on without paying the ransom. So that's why recently what we observed is that the attackers changed the tactics a bit. So they don't only encrypt your data, but also make a copy and leak, and then blackmail the users with the leakage of information if the ransom is not paid. And of course, GDPR makes it more complicated for the companies, because if it's data leakage, they are obliged by law in Europe to inform all the users that their data has been stolen. So it also, first of all, creates a huge hit from the PR point of view, but also it brings a risk of fines, and those are very substantial fines from the authorities if they fail to inform the users, or if they fail to react or protect the data. Sometimes that's why the tactics has changed recently. Now, if any of you is using Garmin, probably this summer you noticed that a couple of days, maybe close to a week, Garmin was down and all the services were down. Garmin actually never officially confirmed that it was a cyber attack, but pretty much experts around the world are pretty much agreeing that yes, it was the attack of ransomware. Some sources inside Garmin actually said that it was wasted locker, which is in turn related to some Russian, which is called Evil Corp, is the group of cyber criminals that are monetizing the crypto attacks. Now, why this example is interesting? It's also violated the federal law that is actually prohibiting transferring any money to the company that is blacklisted. So what is a very tragic choice to a company that was attacked by a ransomware is that on the one hand, you have to pay ransom, and you can never be sure if that ransom is going to fix the problem, even if you pay it. But also, you're risking serious fines if you actually pay the ransom, because then you are transferring money to the company that is blacklisted. Also, there are several companies that are specializing in the brokerage services between attacked companies and cyber criminals. So you basically pay the brokerage company to pay the ransom for you, and simply they give you an invoice for fixing that for you. So that's also an interesting trend on the market. Now, it's worth remembering that it is not always about the ransom. So the reasons for cyber attacks are varying. Sometimes it is about stealing your money, and then you can see that somebody is siphoning out money from your bank account or the company's bank account. Sometimes it's about ransom indeed, but sometimes it's just about the pure theft of information or pure theft of intellectual property. And in those cases, I believe what we are seeing is just the tip of an iceberg, because especially in cyber espionage cases and intellectual property theft, if anybody notices the attack, it means that the attackers has made a mistake. So something went wrong. In a perfect scenario, you want to steal whatever is the design or the information about the vaccine, which is like trending nowadays, or a new movie that is not yet published, and then disappear silently so that nobody notices. So if we find out that, or if it's noisy enough that we can actually see that there was some incident, it means that the attackers made a mistake. Now, the frequent misconception is that cyber espionage and intellectual property theft is just a risk for the bigger companies, and the smaller ones, they don't need to worry, which is generally true. It's hard to imagine that someone would break into like pharmacy chain or a corner shop. However, there are several smaller companies that are actually handling super sensitive and super important intellectual property. One example that comes to my mind is that if you imagine that you are a company or a small studio that works on yet unpublished movie, just adding some soundtrack to it. It can be a very small company. It can be 5 people. They don't need to make huge money, but they are actually sitting on the gold mine when it comes to the intellectual property. So if that information or if that movie leaks ahead of premiere, then it can mean huge trouble for them, but also huge profit for the attackers. What we also see, and it's worth remembering, that the attackers, if they see that they cannot penetrate the main company, let's say you want to hack Lockheed Martin or you want to hack Boeing, then it might be much easier to actually, instead of going directly at Lockheed Martin or Boeing, to try to break into one of their subcontractors. It's called supply chain attack. So instead of going for the bigger company that is more likely to be better protected, you actually go after their partners and subcontractors. And you might be asking if it's expensive. So if it's really that expensive, and those big hacks are actually generating lots of losses. And here you can see the headline that Marriott Hotels got fined with a substantial 18.4 million pounds for data breach, and it's just a fine. So it's just one fraction of the cost. But actually, if you look at the sources of the cost of a serious breach, it's not just ransom and it's not just fines, but this is also lawsuits. So you are likely to get sued by angry customers. You will lose some revenue. So if your production lines or whatever is your core business is stopped for a period of time, it will cause a significant loss. And I had a chance of discussing that with one of the CISOs of the Scandinavian banks, and he said that if their systems are down even for 1 hour, the effect will be so substantial that it will be clearly visible on the yearly financial results. So it's also important to remember that the company is losing money every minute that they cannot work, that they cannot conduct the core business. Then we have loss of trust. So over the time, and this is kind of expanded in time, so customers might lose the trust and simply leave. A good example of that is that a couple of months ago, there was, again, ransomware attack on the mental health clinic in Finland. And they refused to pay the ransom. So the attackers, instead of demanding the ransom from the company, they started blackmailing the individuals of whom they have stolen the information from that clinic. And you can imagine what kind of trust issue it generates for that company. And then last but not least, the cost of experts. And we usually tend to think that it's just the cost of the forensics or the technicians directly working with the recovery after the incident. But it's not just that. You need PR experts to kind of handle the PR disaster that is happening in the media around the breach. You need lawyers to assess all the legal consequences of the breach. So it's a bigger project than just finding what happened and bringing the systems back to work. Now, the message I would like to leave you with that with such serious incidents, even very mature companies are actually caught pants down. You might be thinking that we are so used to the attacks and that we see so many infections and so many threats around us that it's nothing new. I mean, nothing can surprise us. Believe me, it can. I've been there several times looking at the senior management of very big companies in complete panic when the serious incident came, because they were simply not used to that. They didn't know what to do. And even if they had plans, those plans were not exercised before the incident. So now some light in the tunnel. So what you can actually do. The sad news that you will never be able to protect yourself 100%, especially against highly motivated and well-paid attacker. But you can make their work way harder and at least limit the damage and limit the surface of attack. So OPSEC, educate your human beings, educate your coworkers, make them aware of the threats and make them sensitive to all the alarm signs, especially when it comes to phishing, because phishing is by far the easiest way of getting a foothold in the company. Make sure you cover the basics. So all good malware protection, cloud protection, and especially two-factor authentication are a must-have. Quite useful category of solutions is EDR or MDR system. So EDR is endpoint detection and response, and MDR is the kind of service version of that technology that actually can help you detect the attackers when they are already inside your network. Vulnerability management. So it's quite important to understand your weak points, especially on the systems that are facing the public network. Now, a bit controversial advice from me. Don't think that just throwing money at a problem will solve it. So don't invest in tools that might give you some illusion of security. But basically, those are just tools that you need to have capacity to use or have capacity to absorb the results of those. This is pretty important. We have seen a lot of companies investing plenty of money in the tools that they were not able to use efficiently. It was simply, first of all, lost money, but also it gave like a very unjustified sense of security, because just having an expensive system doesn't make you any more secure. You need to know how to use that. Drills, that cannot be stressed enough, that it's not enough to have a plan. You need to exercise that plan, and you need to conduct drills of critical security incident response. The growing number of companies are actually doing that. Logging, this is obvious thing, but make sure that the logs are useful. We have seen several times that there were logs, but in the end of the day, they were useless for forensic investigation. Patent testing is always good, so assess your stuff. It's always better to know if your software or if your systems have some vulnerability. And the last thing is to discover your assets. This is especially important in multi-cloud environment, where even for a mid-sized company, it's close to impossible to understand what do you have, what kind of asset do you have, which of those assets are visible to the public network. And it's not just IP, it's not just host, but it can be S3 buckets in AWS. So this is very important to understand what is actually your attack surface and where are you exposed to attacks. That's it from my end. If there are any questions or comments, I'm happy to take them. Right, seems not. Thank you very much for your attention.